My name is David, and for 15 years, I thought my marriage to Sophia was solid and unshakable. We had built a life that many would envy. Two smart and beautiful daughters, steady careers, and a home in a peaceful, upscale neighborhood. Sophia worked as a translator at a film studio, while I managed security for a prominent company. Together, we created a home where everything seemed to function smoothly, at least on the surface. Sophia had always been attractive, with striking blue eyes that drew people in. After the birth of our second daughter, she had difficulty losing some pregnancy weight, but her presence still carried an undeniable charm. She stopped wearing contact lenses, saying they made paperwork uncomfortable, and switched to large glasses that only made her eyes stand out more. While others might have seen her slight changes as flaws, I saw the same woman I married. That said, I didn't ignore things. I noticed everything, but I expected her to respect the trust one gave her. Our household operated like clockwork. I handled responsibilities at home when necessary, especially on the Fridays when Sophia went out with her female colleagues. They had a habit of hopping from one pub to another, and she assured me that it was nothing more than casual drinks and friendly conversations. Fine, I thought, everyone needs some downtime. While she was out, I made sure the house ran smoothly. I cooked, spent time with our daughters, and ensured everything was taken care of. Sophia would typically return by 8 p.m., allowing us to enjoy the rest of the weekend as a family. But recently, something had shifted. She started coming home later, sometimes as late as 10 p.m., with a faint smell of alcohol lingering when she walked in. She'd flash her usual smile, trying to keep up the image of the devoted wife. I didn't make a big deal out of it at first. There are limits to how much I'd accept, but I wanted to observe quietly before acting. Then came the email. On a Monday morning, I received a message from someone calling themselves a friend. The email said they'd been at a bar called the Black Crow the previous Friday and saw Sophia dancing, mostly with one man from her company. The sender claimed they'd taken a picture and attached it, suggesting I take a look and decide for myself whether I thought her behavior was appropriate. Why someone would go out of their way to send this was a question I didn't waste much time on. I wasn't the type to sit around overanalyzing other people's motives. My focus shifted immediately to the file attached to the email. Whatever was in there, it was going to be dealt with decisively. I didn't feel unease or panic. What I felt was focus. Sophia's actions, if they crossed the line, wouldn't be tolerated. It was unsettling to learn that Sophia had been dancing with a man she had never mentioned before. Until now, I had assumed her Friday nights were spent with her female colleagues, as she always claimed. The thought of her engaging with someone unfamiliar, particularly in such an intimate setting, was troubling. I couldn't shake the suspicion that the man in question might not even be a colleague, but rather someone she encountered at the bar. Despite my resolve to remain calm, a wave of irritation swept over me. I couldn't ignore the nagging curiosity sparked by the email, so I clicked on the attachment. The image loaded, slightly blurry, as though the photographer had taken it discreetly. In the background, I could make out a long table where her colleagues, both men and women, were seated. But it was the foreground that held my attention. There she was, Sophia, standing on the dance floor in a beige blouse adorned with red flowers and green leaves, paired with brown trousers. The outfit was unmistakable. It was exactly what she had worn the previous Friday when she came home unusually late. My suspicion hardened into certainty. This photo was taken that same evening. What struck me most was her expression. She wasn't just dancing. She was pressed close to a tall, younger man, her arms wrapped around his neck. He held her tightly, their bodies so close it was impossible to ignore the intimacy of their posture. Her smile wasn't casual or friendly. It was one of unmistakable pleasure. That look was not for a stranger, and it certainly wasn't for her husband. I studied the scene intently, noticing every detail. The man's lower body was pressed firmly against hers, and I could see the mutual attraction in their closeness. Sophia didn't appear uneasy or reluctant. In fact, her posture radiated enthusiasm. Their locked gaze made the situation even more damning. It disgusted me. Seeing her in such an embrace, so openly affectionate with someone else, was a level of disrespect I hadn't anticipated. The woman I thought I knew, the mother of my children, was out in public acting like this? It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was an outright insult to our family and everything we had built together. Questions flooded my mind. Was this man really a stranger? Or had she been hiding his existence from me all along? How long had this been going on? How many Fridays had I unknowingly stayed home with our daughters, cooking dinner, while she behaved like this behind my back? I needed answers. But I wasn't going to jump to conclusions without hard evidence. My next steps had to be deliberate. There would be no emotional outburst, no hasty confrontation. If Sophia thought she could deceive me, she was sorely mistaken. I wasn't the kind of man to let such behavior slide, and I certainly wouldn't tolerate dishonesty in my home. For the next half hour, I sat in the privacy of our bathroom, carefully replaying the details of the past few months in my head. Every late night, every excuse, every unusual behavior, everything suddenly seemed connected. My frustration simmered, but I refused to let it boil over. Confronting her would happen on my terms, not hers. By the time I left the bathroom, I had made my decision. I would uncover the truth with or without her cooperation. If Sophia was guilty of betrayal, she'd find out soon enough that I wasn't a man she could deceive without consequences. Patience was my priority now. I wouldn't let emotions cloud my judgment, nor would I act impulsively. If Sophia thought she could deceive me, she was gravely mistaken. I would uncover the truth methodically, without tipping my hand prematurely. Confrontation wasn't my immediate goal. I needed irrefutable evidence first. Whether her actions stemmed from disloyalty or mere recklessness, I intended to get to the bottom of it. Sophia's workplace wasn't far from mine, and my frequent business trips gave me enough flexibility to discreetly observe her. The next day, I parked at the far end of her office lot around 11:30 a.m. in my company vehicle, confident that the tinted windows provided me with cover. I kept my eyes on the exit, ready to follow any lead. That day, I waited until 1 p.m., but she never appeared. I repeated this surveillance over several days. On Friday, at exactly 12:15 p.m., my patience paid off. Sophia emerged from the building with a small group, 2 men and a woman. They got into a sleek black BMW, with Sophia comfortably seated in the front passenger seat. Without hesitation, I tailed them, keeping a discreet distance as they weaved through the busy streets. Their destination was an upscale restaurant. From a spot across the street, I observed them through the restaurant's large windows. Sophia seemed cheerful, her laughter animated, her mannerisms light and carefree. What caught my attention was the familiarity she displayed toward one of the men, a tall blonde, the same man from the photograph. Their easy camaraderie bordered on flirtation. They lingered in the restaurant for nearly 2 hours before stepping out. As they walked back to the car, Sophia and the blonde man were side by side. Their body language spoke volumes. An unspoken understanding existed between them. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I watched her playful gestures, her smile reserved just for him. Together, they returned to the office, disappearing inside as if nothing had happened. Up to that point, Sophia hadn't committed any overtly damning act. Still, her deception, hiding these outings, lying about her activities was unacceptable. Her apparent comfort around this man wasn't something I could ignore. It wasn't just professional. It was personal, and it concerned me deeply. What made it worse was that, instead of joining her usual Friday post-work gatherings with female colleagues, she came home early that evening, cheerful and seemingly carefree. Sophia walked in at 5:15 p.m., her usual affectionate demeanor intact. She kissed me hello, her blue eyes shining as if nothing was amiss. I suppressed my anger, knowing this wasn't the right moment for confrontation. Instead, I kept my responses measured. After dinner, while we sat watching TV, I casually asked her about her day and her lunch plans. Her response was smooth but telling. For a brief moment, she hesitated, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Then she answered with practiced ease, claiming she had eaten a tuna sandwich she'd packed that morning. The lie was blatant, yet she delivered it with confidence, looking at me with those same eyes that once made me feel invincible. In that moment, I realized the extent of her deception. She was either testing my awareness or had grown far too comfortable with her dishonesty. Anger surged within me, but I kept my composure. This wasn't the time to react emotionally. Instead, I changed the subject, redirecting the conversation to my own day at work. The rest of the weekend passed as if nothing had happened. We went to the zoo with our daughters, sharing laughter and creating memories. But underneath the surface, I was planning my next move. I didn't tail her during the week. I saved my energy for Friday evening, when I knew the situation would come to a head. When Friday arrived, I made sure everything at home was in order. I picked up our daughters after school at 3:15 p.m., ordered pizza, and spent time with them, ensuring they were happy and settled. My next steps were already decided. The time to act was drawing near. After ensuring my daughters were settled, I calmly explained that I had some work to take care of at the office. They were independent enough to handle a quiet evening at home, provided they locked the doors. Confident they would be safe and sound asleep by the time I returned, I left the house without hesitation and headed straight to Sophia's workplace. I arrived at her office parking lot at precisely 5 p.m. and waited in my car, parked at a distance to avoid detection. At 5:15 p.m., I watched as she drove out of the lot, heading in the opposite direction of our home. It didn't take much to deduce her intentions. This was no ordinary commute. She was on her way to one of her usual Friday night outings. Following her was straightforward, as the evening traffic provided ample cover. Her Toyota blended seamlessly into the stream of cars, making it easy to remain unnoticed. 10 minutes later, I saw her vehicle pull into the parking lot of a place called the Glass Shoe, a hybrid bar and restaurant. I parked at the far edge of the lot, maintaining my discretion while observing her movements. After Sophia and her group entered the establishment, I took the opportunity to survey the area. The building was situated at the corner of the lot, bordered by a neatly trimmed cedar fence that stood about 5 feet high. 2 entrances led to separate sections of the building, one for the bar and another for the restaurant. I also noted a black BMW parked near the cedar hedge, the same car I had seen her ride in during the previous Friday's lunch outing. With every detail committed to memory, I returned to my car and prepared myself for the next phase. I quickly changed into a black windbreaker, donned a baseball cap, and put on glasses to alter my appearance. A protective mouthpiece subtly changed the shape of my face, making me virtually unrecognizable. I glanced in the rearview mirror, satisfied with my transformation. This wasn't about mingling or making conversation. It was about observing and gathering evidence. I waited patiently for an hour before stepping into the bar. As I entered, I quickly spotted Sophia, sitting with her group near the dance floor. The group consisted of 6 women and 4 men, with Sophia seated conspicuously close to the blonde man from the photo. My jaw tightened, but I kept my emotions in check. The time for confrontation would come later, but not here and not now. Choosing a table in a dimly lit corner far from their group, I positioned myself to watch without drawing attention. From my vantage point, I observed their interactions closely. The mood at their table was lively, filled with laughter and animated conversation. Music began to play, drawing people to the dance floor. Within moments, I saw Sophia rise and join the blonde man for a dance. The scene unfolded like a replay of the photograph I had received. Their movements were intimate, their expressions relaxed and familiar. The remaining men at the table exchanged knowing smirks as they watched, clearly amused by what was happening. It wasn't hard to see the dynamic here. Sophia and this man were more than mere acquaintances. I sat back, my mind focused and resolute. If she thought this behavior could remain hidden, she was gravely mistaken. The evening had already revealed enough for me to take my next steps, and I wasn't going to let her off easily. Several hours passed, and Sophia's group began to dwindle, leaving only her, another woman, and 2 men. Eventually, both pairs found themselves on the dance floor. There was no doubt anymore. Sophia and the blonde man were not just casual acquaintances. Their closeness and body language left nothing to interpretation. His hands rested firmly on her waist, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. It was intimate, deliberate, and bold. As I watched, he leaned down and whispered something into her ear. To my disgust, She nodded with a faint smile, and together they walked out, hand in hand. This was no ordinary dance partner. This was someone she trusted enough to leave the public eye with. Intrigued but focused, I followed them discreetly into the dark street, keeping a safe distance. They moved with ease, completely unaware of my presence, until they stopped at the black BMW parked near the cedar hedge. It was clear why he had parked their privacy. The location was secluded, with no other cars nearby and the hedge acting as a shield. From the shadows, I watched them enter the back seat of the car. Every move they made confirmed their intentions, and I felt a surge of anger rising within me. My suspicions were no longer just doubts. They were now undeniable facts. Determined to uncover the full extent of their betrayal, I moved closer, weaving silently between parked cars until I reached the back of the BMW. The heavily tinted windows offered no visual confirmation, but muffled voices inside left little to the imagination. My grip tightened as I wrestled with my next move. Should I expose them now, or wait until the act was undeniable? That question barely lingered in my mind before the car began to rock rhythmically in time with the music, a detail that only amplified my anger. Without further hesitation, I yanked the door handle, flooding the interior with light from the car's roof lamp. The sight before me left no room for interpretation. Sophia was lying on her back, with the blond man above her. They froze in shock, their expressions shifting from blissful ignorance to utter disbelief as they registered my presence. Calmly, I removed my disguise, slipping off the glasses and mouthpiece that had concealed my identity. The moment her eyes met mine, the reality of her actions struck her. "Oh my God, David, please forgive me," she stammered, her voice trembling with panic. "Don't do anything you'll regret. It meant nothing. Just wait. Let me explain." I stared at her, my expression cold and unwavering. Her excuses were meaningless. Closing the car door with deliberate force, I turned and walked away, ignoring her frantic cries. As I drove off, I saw her in my rearview mirror, chasing after me in a disheveled state, yelling for me to stop. Her pleas were desperate, but they only fueled my resolve. Barely 5 minutes later, Sophia arrived home, tears streaming down her face. "David, I'm so sorry," she sobbed as she entered the house. "I love you more than anything. Please, just listen to me." Her words fell on deaf ears. I stood firm, my voice cutting through her frantic apologies. "You broke the vows that held this family together. In 15 years, I never once betrayed you. If I had known you didn't value fidelity, perhaps I would have looked for comfort elsewhere too." "David, please," she pleaded, her hands trembling. "I love you with all my heart. What I did meant nothing. It was a mistake. You and the girls are my entire world. If I could undo it, I would in a heartbeat." Her tears flowed uncontrollably as she buried her face in her hands. The sight might have evoked pity in another man, but not in me. This wasn't about emotions. It was about the betrayal that she alone had orchestrated. "Stop apologizing," I snapped, my tone as sharp as a blade. "What you've done is unforgivable. Now tell me, who is he, and how long has this been going on?" Unable to stand under the weight of her guilt, she sank onto the sofa, shaking and sobbing. Her remorse was clear, but I wasn't here to comfort her. This was her moment to face the consequences of her choices, and I wasn't going to let her off easily. I grabbed Sophia firmly by the shoulders, my patience hanging by a thread. "Who is he?" I demanded coldly. "And how long has this been going on?" Her voice trembled as she replied, "His name is Nick. He's a colleague from the studio. David, please, this isn't what you think. This just started, I swear." Her tears began to flow again, her disheveled appearance only emphasizing her guilt. "You expect me to believe this just happened?" I retorted sharply. "You've been lying about your outings for years, meeting with him behind my back. Do you think I'm a fool?" "No," she cried, her voice panicked. "It hasn't been years. It's recent, I promise. David, I've never stopped loving you. You and the girls are my world. What I did was a mistake. Please, you have to believe me." Her words were meaningless to me, drowned by the weight of her betrayal. I stood there, watching her plead for forgiveness, her face streaked with tears, but my resolve didn't waver. "You don't understand the gravity of this," I said firmly. "You didn't just betray me. You made a public mockery of our marriage. Do you even realize what this looks like? Your colleagues saw you. Our friends might find out. Your actions are out in the open for the world to see." Sophia broke down completely, her sobs racking her body as she collapsed onto the sofa. "Please, David, don't do this. I can't live without you. I made a mistake, but I can fix it. We can fix it together. Don't throw away everything we've built." Her desperation was clear, but I refused to let her manipulate me with tears. "You threw this away the moment you betrayed me," I said, my voice like steel. "Our marriage is over. I want a divorce." Her cries intensified as she begged, "David, please, don't leave me. Think of the girls. Think of our family. I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us." I shook my head and turned away, needing space from the overwhelming chaos she had unleashed. "Our marriage started falling apart the moment you made the choice to be unfaithful," I said over my shoulder. "And now, you're reaping the consequences." Her wailing escalated, piercing through the silence of the room. I turned briefly to see her crumpled on the floor, her head buried in her hands. For a fleeting moment, I felt the urge to comfort her, to make sense of the mess she had created. But the anger and betrayal burned too deeply. Without another word, I walked out, leaving her to face the reality of her actions alone. I sought refuge at a hotel for the night, needing the distance to collect my thoughts. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind raced with memories of our life together, now tainted by her deceit. By morning, I made the decision to take the day off from work. I informed my secretary, spending the next few hours in the hotel room, trying to process everything. The weight of her betrayal was heavy, but I knew I had to remain strong, for myself and for my daughters. At noon, I finally left the hotel and grabbed a light meal at the restaurant downstairs. As I drove past my house on the way to the office, I noticed a green Toyota parked outside. Recognizing it as Sophia's sister Francine's car, I felt a slight sense of relief. At least my daughters would have someone to rely on during this chaos. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Once I arrived at my office, my phone rang. It was Francine. Her tone was serious, and what she said next stunned me. Sophia had broken down completely after I left the night before. Overwhelmed by the situation, she had called Francine, who found her in an alarming state of despair. Francine had called an ambulance, and Sophia was now in the hospital, struggling to cope with the aftermath of her actions. "David," Francine said firmly, "I'm staying at your house to care for the girls, but you need to come see Sophia. She's not in a good place." I sat back in my chair, processing her words. Sophia's betrayal had destroyed our marriage, but now her condition added a new layer of complexity to an already unbearable situation. Despite everything, I needed to decide how to handle this with a clear head and a steady hand. When my call with Francine ended, I sat in silence, trying to process the weight of her words. Sophia was at Santa Maria City Hospital in critical condition, and it was hard to reconcile the woman I had left sobbing on the floor with the image of someone completely broken. As much as her betrayal had torn our marriage apart, her sudden collapse introduced a layer of complexity I hadn't anticipated. I knew I needed to face this situation directly, not because of guilt or second-guessing my choices, but because my daughters deserved a father who could navigate even the most challenging circumstances with strength. While Sophia's actions had caused this mess, my response now would shape the future for my family. With that resolve, I grabbed my keys and left for the hospital. The drive there was tense, my thoughts swinging between anger and determination. I didn't regret leaving her that night. It had been the right choice to avoid an emotionally charged confrontation that could have spiraled out of control. Still, the consequences of my absence were now clear. Had I misjudged how fragile she had become? Regardless, Sophia needed to face the reality of her actions, and I needed answers. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Francine waiting for me in the lobby. Her expression was a mix of concern and frustration. "David, she's not doing well," Francine began without preamble. "You need to see her." I nodded, but remained silent as we walked towards Sophia's room. Francine filled me in on the events that had unfolded after I left the previous night. Sophia had called her in a fit of panic, barely coherent, as she tried to explain what had happened. By the time Francine arrived, she found Sophia in a state of complete emotional collapse. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Francine had called for an ambulance. "She's been asking for you," Francine added as we reached the door. "David, she's not just broken, she's scared. Whatever you decide, just remember, she's still the mother of your children." I didn't respond. Francine's words, while well-meaning, didn't change the fact that Sophia's betrayal had shattered our marriage. Yet, I couldn't ignore the gravity of her current condition either. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room. Sophia lay on the hospital bed, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her once vibrant blue eyes were dull, clouded by guilt and despair. She turned to me as I entered, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming." I crossed my arms and stood at the foot of her bed, my tone firm. "Sophia, I'm here because our daughters need stability, and I need to understand what led to this." Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she struggled to find the right words. "I made a mistake. No, I made the worst mistake of my life. I was weak, and I let something meaningless destroy everything. Please, David, I need you to believe that I never stopped loving you." Her words felt hollow, a weak attempt to shift responsibility. "Sophia," I said sharply, cutting through her sobs, "you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, a deliberate one, to betray me, our daughters, and the life we built together. Don't talk to me about love when your actions say otherwise." She flinched at my tone, but I didn't stop. "You invited this chaos into our lives, Sophia. And now, our daughters are the ones paying the price. So tell me, was it worth it? Was Nick worth throwing away 15 years of marriage?" Her tears flowed freely now, and her voice cracked as she answered. "No, he wasn't worth it. None of it was worth it. I was stupid, David, blind to what I was risking. Please, I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me how to make it right." I stared at her, unmoved by her pleas. "This isn't something you can fix overnight, Sophia. The damage is done. But right now, my focus is on our daughters. They're the only reason I'm here." Her sobs intensified, but I turned away, needing space to think. Francine's words echoed in my mind. Sophia was still the mother of my children, and I owed it to them to handle this with care. But forgiving her? That was another matter entirely. Sophia's descent into infidelity had begun subtly, her first mistake being not telling me when men started attending their gatherings. What began as seemingly harmless interactions evolved into something far deeper. Their shared dances during slow songs, their whispered conversations. It all built a connection she couldn't ignore. Eventually, it led to that fateful moment when, under the dim lights of the dance floor, they kissed. That kiss wasn't casual. It was the kind of kiss that breaks barriers and sets wheels in motion. The following Friday, he found a way to get her alone after one of their outings. What began as an excuse to step outside ended with them entangled in his car, a moment of passion that would forever alter our lives. Her guilt, however, didn't stop her. Daily interactions at work only strengthened their connection, and she struggled to distance herself from him. Yet she claimed to still love me, convincing herself that her actions didn't diminish our marriage. This affair continued for 4 months before it all unraveled. Now, she lay in a hospital bed, recounting every detail of her betrayal as I listened silently. My face remained stoic, but inside, I was processing the full scope of her actions. "David, I know I betrayed your trust," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "But please give me a chance to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to save our marriage." I stood by the window, my back turned to her. "You don't understand," I replied coldly. "It's not just about the betrayal. It's about the lies, the deceit, and the disregard for what we built. This wasn't one mistake. It was months of choices you made knowing what was at stake." Tears streamed down her face as she continued to beg for forgiveness. "I know I don't deserve it, but I love you, David. I love you and the girls more than anything." I turned to face her, my expression firm. Love isn't enough, Sophia. Actions matter. And your actions have destroyed the foundation of this family. Whether you see it or not, your decisions have left scars on all of us, not just me. Despite her fragile state, I couldn't let her manipulate the situation. I needed to be clear-headed for myself and for our daughters. After leaving the hospital, I returned to my hotel room and called my lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking closure. The betrayal had stripped away the trust that held our marriage together, and no amount of apologies could rebuild it. Within days, the divorce papers were delivered to Sophia in the hospital. The news shattered her already fragile emotional state, and that same day, I received a call from her doctor informing me that she had suffered a stroke. The weight of those words was immense, but even as guilt crept in, I knew this situation was the result of her choices. I visited her in the hospital, staying by her side for 3 days, watching her condition worsen. Despite my anger, I couldn't ignore the pain she was in. But her betrayal was a wound I couldn't heal, and staying by her side wouldn't change what had happened. 2 months passed, and Sophia's condition only partially improved. She was left paralyzed on her left side, a tragic reminder of the consequences of her actions. As much as I tried to move past my anger, every glance at her brought back the vivid memory of her betrayal in that car. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to move out of the house. I rented a nearby apartment to remain close to my daughters and continue being a father they could rely on. Sophia's actions had torn apart the life we once had, and while I would always be there for our daughters, I couldn't live in a home where trust had been shattered so completely. As I packed my belongings, I reflected on how everything had unraveled. Sophia had turned a happy, stable life into chaos, and though I carried the burden of ensuring our daughters' well-being, I refused to let her mistakes define my future.